This started as a simple idea to build a cinematic AI commercial, and it turned into way more than I expected.
I never told you my feet hurt, Ma. I knew we didn't have the money. So I taped them up. I turned the pain into power. I stopped trying to fit into a world that was too small for me, and I started building a new one.
There were things that worked really well, and a lot of things that didn't, and some mistakes that I'm gonna try to never make again. And in this video, I'm gonna break down my real workflow, what actually held up, where things broke down, and how I do this much more efficiently next time. So if you're new here, I'm Khalil from AI for Real Life. Over the past year, I've been deep in the AI image and video space, testing tools, breaking down workflows, and figuring out what actually works in real world projects, not just polished demos. This channel isn't about hype or one-click magic. It's about learning how to direct AI instead of just prompting it, and build workflows that you can actually repeat and improve over time. All right, let's dive in. All right, what's going on, guys? So this is another behind the scenes look at a project I've been working on for a while now, but it's finally starting to come around the bend, and I just wanted to kind of take a minute to walk you through what's changed, the tools that made it into my workflow, and really just more importantly, why. So this isn't a finished project walkthrough, it's more of my process update. I want to show you how I actually work through something like this in real time. So what holds up, what drifts, and where things can break, especially if you're not intentional. So as I'm going through this, I'll frame everything around a framework that I use for story-driven creative concept projects. I don't use this framework for every project, but when emotion, pacing, narrative, things like that, they matter. When things like that matter more than rigid efficiency, this is the structure that I try to fall back on. So sometimes I build out guides for these sort of frameworks and these workflows, and if I do, I'll leave one linked in the description. If not, just know I'll probably circle back to it later, and you can keep checking. And as you're watching this, if you would like a course on something like this, just comment course in the comments so I can see how many people would be interested. And what I'll do is wherever I end up falling with this project, I'll play it at the very end of this video. So if you want to check that out, it should be on there. All right, so this project followed what I call a story-driven concept framework, and it's not meant to be completely rigid. It's definitely not meant to be perfect. It's really designed for projects where exploration happens early and refinement happens later. And that's not a strict rule, but that's just kind of how I've used this. So my basic flow looks like this. I go from idea, music, character lock, scenes and coverage, a 9-frame storyboard, image generation and refinement, video generation, and then the edits, and then narration or dialogue or whatever goes in that project, and then sound design, final polish. So that is my process with a project like this normally. And it varies every single time a little bit. But the order does really matter. Most of the issues that I ran into with this project came from drifting away from the order while I was in creative mode. And that kind of happens, right? You get into creative mode and you don't want to stop and do all the tedious stuff and you drift, and that's what happened to me. All right, so step one of this process is the idea phase. So everything starts with an idea, and at this stage, I'm not really thinking about tools, I'm not thinking about prompts, I'm not thinking about shots or models. I'm really kind of focused on emotion, just what the story is really about, what transformation is happening, what the viewer should feel by the end. And if that part isn't really clear, everything down line can get a little mixed up. So for this project, the idea stayed pretty intentionally loose. This wasn't a client job, this was a concept piece meant to explore kind of what's possible and show them a concept, right? I usually use ChatGPT or Gemini here to pressure test ideas and just do the brainstorming, expand thoughts, and shape the narrative sort of direction with everything. And I'll also pull some visual references at this point just to establish the tone and mood, but nothing is really locked in. It's really the whole ideation phase. And then step two is music. And this is where my process starts to look a little bit different from a lot of people probably, I don't know. For story-driven projects like this, especially when it's coming just from my head without somebody saying, this is what I want, the music phase comes before the visual phase. See, music becomes the emotional timeline for me. It defines the pacing, the tension, and the release. And once the song is locked in, it becomes the backbone of the project. It's like a musical storyboard. So for this project, I started with the emotional direction, and I used ChatGPT to help me turn the rough idea into actual lyrics. that are structured along this storyline. So I go back and forth with ChatGPT, Gemini, sometimes Claude for things like this. So from there, I moved on to Suno. And if you're not familiar with Suno, it is an AI music generation platform. And in there, when I'm in Suno, I'm not trying to create a perfect song, right? That's not my thing. Some people are making careers off of Suno right now, but that's not what I'm in there for. But somebody in the last video was asking me a little bit about Suno and the process there. So I'll jump in real quick to show you what it's all about. So with Suno, here's Suno right here. Basically how it works is you get a certain amount of daily credits. I did a little Black Friday deal where it was like $50 or something for the whole year because I do use it kind of frequently. But with Suno, all I do is I jump in and I go to this Create tab. They have a ton of features and different things you can do here. I'm not into all that, but there's a lot that you can do with this. And what I'll do is I take the lyrics that I had generated and iterated with ChatGPT or Gemini or whatever. I drop the lyrics in there, and then for this, I go ahead and I add the style, whatever I'm feeling for this song. And somebody asked me in one of the other comments, what's the title of this track? And honestly, I had to scroll through and find it, but here it is, and it's literally just hook, anthem level catchy song or something like that. So anyways, for this one, I ended up doing acoustic Afro beats, and it was just something I just was like, oh, that sounds pretty interesting. That sounds cool. Like I would like to see what that would sound like. And it came up with a version. And with Suno, you get, I don't know, 50 free daily credits or something like that, where you can go in and you can make songs for free. And I think you have to have the subscription for their newest version, which is V5, but the quality on the latest version, V4.5 before that, is actually really solid. And that's what this track was made on. So you can literally make a track at this quality that's in this video that I'm doing for free. So anyways, that's my whole process with Suno. You can dive deeper into that. There's tons of videos out there on YouTube if you want to dive into that. So once I found the track that I want and everything clicks and I like the direction that it is and it tells the story in a good enough way, then I drop that song into my editing software. I use CapCut or Final Cut Pro, depending on the level of the edit that I'm planning on doing. I usually start off in CapCut, and if I want to go deeper, I go into Final Cut Pro. But you can use whatever platform you like for this. So after I have my musical timeline built out, step 3 is locking in the character look. So this is the real first kind of hard constraint in the process. And here's where the character gets locked in: face, age, build, wardrobe, overall vibe, all that kind of stuff. One important thing that I do here is create what I call a pose sheet. And it's a simple 2-image reference. On the left side, I lock in the clean headshot, and on the right side, the full body shot. So the headshot controls the facial consistency, and the body shot controls the proportion, posture, wardrobe, whatever you want to have in there. So these 2 images become the anchor for everything that comes next. And there are a few different variations of this that you can do. You can do like a character pose sheet and all different variations of this, just as long as you have all the elements, different angles, all the things to lock in your character. But everything branches from this reference. And honestly, on this project, this is where I drifted. So I started making small changes to the character. As I was going through, I decided to make some refinements. I was like, okay, I want him to look like this in this part of the story. I want him to look like this in this part of the story because he'd be a little bit older and different things like that. So I was in creative mode at that time. I was making these small changes and refining the overall look and the different phases, but instead of going back to the original pose sheet every time, I use the latest generation image as my new reference. And that's an easy mistake to make because each image looks close enough to the last one. But every generation introduces these tiny little changes, a slightly different face shape. It's much better than it was a few months ago before the Nano Banana Pros and the new ChatGPT 1.5 and all the other new image models out here. But it still does shift a little bit. So these changes, they compound over time. So instead of branching everything from the original anchor, I was effectively playing a game of visual telephone where each step moved the character a little further away from the original content. So that's what people usually mean when they talk about character drift. It's not one big mistake all the time. It's a bunch of small, almost invisible ones that compound. So if this were a client project, for example, I would stop, go back, and reset these characters and regenerate the images and videos that may have been affected by this drift. But because this was a concept piece and I value progress over perfection when it's my own stuff, I let some of it slide, and you can see the impact later in the process. All right, so step 4 in this process is scenes and coverage. So locking in the scenes works pretty much the same way, or it works very similarly to locking in character looks. So before generating any video, each scene in the story, in my opinion, needs to be defined and anchored. So where we are, what's happening, and the details of the scene. So once the scene exists, the goal is to lock it visually before moving forward. So for each scene, I treat it almost like a character, like I said. I try to generate a strong base image of the environment first, like the room, the court, the street, whatever the location is. And then from there, I focus on the coverage, meaning I get as many different angles as possible. And you can do that same sort of 9-image contact sheet storyboarding style to get these different angles, but it's the same thing with the characters. Make sure you go back to the reference image and everything is locked in and not drifting when you go to expand those smaller shots. So this way, if you need a new shot halfway through your project, you're no longer asking the model to invent a brand new environment, you're asking it to reframe an existing one. And that keeps the continuity a lot better. You can drop in your character in your pose that kind of fits in that scene and say, hey, put these together, make sure everything stays consistent. And you've got a lot better than you just asking the model to look at the opposite angle of the room with the opposite angle of your character, but it has no reference of that. Now, during this whole process, there's something that I do in my workflow that I haven't really mentioned yet. Specifically when it comes to this part of the process with image and video generation and prompting and things like that, I have been using ChatGPT's Atlas browser, and I know there's probably gonna be people in the comments about the security and privacy and all that kind of stuff, but I use it. So what I've been doing and why I like it is because they have introduced this sidebar where you can reference a different chat or you can start a new chat, but you can also reference whatever's in that window of your browser. And then you can go back and forth and use it that way. And Gemini does something very similar, but the reason I like ChatGPT's is because ChatGPT has the option to just speak what you do, and my typing is terrible, like non-existent. And I know there's things like Whisperflow or whatever it's called, where you can do that all over your computer, but I don't need another subscription, so I'm just doing it this way. So anyways, it made the workflow process a lot better because I can just talk to it over here. It's got my templates already lined up in that chat, and then I can just bounce that information back and forth into wherever I'm generating, whether it's Higgsfield or another platform or Flow or whatever, and I can use those prompts that I have baked up over here into there. That was just a little side note about something that I'm using in my workflow that might work for you. So step 5 is the 9-frame storyboard. And before generating the 9-frame storyboard grids, I'm usually creating or pulling from a small set of base images for the scene. So the base images act as a visual starting point for the storyboard variations. They're not the final shots most times, they just exist specifically so I can explore composition, framing, camera angles, and emotional beats without overthinking the polish. But sometimes they end up working because these models are really strong right now. But this is where the controlled exploration really happens. See, I've talked about this 9-frame storyboard approach in a previous video, so I won't go too deep here, but if you want the full breakdown, you can go and watch that one. But the goal of the 9-frame storyboard is really speed. So instead of generating perfect shots right away or generating each shot individually from a different angle, I use the prompt for the 9-frame storyboard grid to explore composition or framing or camera ideas or just pretty much whatever. And like I said, these images are not meant to be final, they're sketches, they're storyboard. But here's a really important part of this not to miss. So once I have a frame that really looks good in the storyboard, I go through the whole upscaling process. I ask it to upscale frame number whatever, and it goes ahead and generates that for me. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it does a completely different frame of the storyboard. That's just a part of the process. But it's very important right here to reintroduce the locked-in references. So that means matching the refined image. So if you upscale an image from the storyboard, you have to go back and then use your character reference, your scene reference, whatever is represented in this scene, and have Nano Banana Pro or whatever you're using, go back and lock that back in, because sometimes during this process, it's gonna change it a little bit because these images in the storyboard are smaller and it'll end up missing some details or hallucinating or drifting a little bit. So this is a very important part. And honestly, during this project, I was having a lot of fun in this phase because this whole storyboarding process had just kind of dawned on me. I just found it and it was fast, creative, and addictive. And because of time constraints and being in a creative flow, I didn't always stop to refine each selected frame properly before moving on. So instead of carefully anchoring each refined image back to the original character and scene, I let some of the storyboard images kind of move forward as is. And then you can see right here how many images and videos that I was doing and generating during this phase, because Higgsfield had unlimited generations for all these new models that were coming out with Kling and Nano Banana Pro and all these kind of things. So I was just going crazy with it. But as you can see, I had so many images at a certain point that honestly, eye fatigue set in, and just fatigue in general. So everything looked close enough. And I'm doing this in between client projects. So small inconsistencies didn't even jump out anymore because I was working on what time I had. And that's when drift starts to compound. So the lesson here is pretty simple but important, as the 9-frame storyboard is for exploration, but refinement is a completely separate step. So if you don't pause here to realign each chosen frame with your locked character and location and whatever, you're gonna end up paying for it later when fixing inconsistencies becomes much harder. All right, so step 6 is image generation and refinement. So we've been generating some of the images already, I know, but this is where the execution really begins. The part that I was talking about a little bit earlier is where structure matters more than creativity at this point. So by now, a lot of the images already existed from the storyboard phase. The exploration had already happened. Yeah, we're gonna make some more, but the characters are locked in, the scenes are locked in. Now the goal is selection and refinement. And this step is about going back through the storyboard images, choosing the shots that actually serve the story and keep the same look, and treating each selected frame as kind of a hero image. So every image that moves forward from here needs to be more intentional and refined and re-anchored. And that means reintroducing the character pose sheets and different things like that we talked about earlier, just to make sure that everything stays consistent. And there's another element that goes into this that sometimes we forget and sometimes I forget also. And it's good to have the reference images, but it's also really good to have everything mapped out in the prompt. So even with reference images, the prompt itself still needs to reinforce what you've locked in, like the cameras, the lenses, focal length, lighting, character identity, wardrobe, all those kind of things. And as a side note, I've been using Higgsfield Cinema Studio a little bit lately because I like what it's putting out and the quality that it's giving me. But one of the cool things about it, and I did a whole other video about this that you can check out, but one of the cool things about it is that they give you a section for the image generation part where you can test out different cinematic cameras, combining all of those plus different focal lengths. And that has helped me lock in a certain look. And you can do the rest of the project in there as 21:9 formats, but you can also, after you lock in the look by messing around with it, you can take those, the camera, the lens, and the focal lengths, and drop those back into your prompt template and keep moving forward outside of there. But anyways, I do like what I'm getting out of this, and I did use this on some of these scenes in the project towards the end. But even with that, if you're generating a shot, you want to keep some things in mind. For example, if you're generating a shot that only shows a hand of your character and you don't describe in detail whose hand it is or what they're wearing or skin tone or ethnicity or whatever, as the model generates the video, it might pan up their arm and it would be a completely different character, completely different outfit, all that stuff, because all it's going off of is the hand. So locking in the character reference is good for that if the video model allows that, but if not, you have to definitely put that in the prompt, or you don't have to do anything, but that's what I suggest. So this is pretty much the phase where slowing down can actually save you time later, because every inconsistency that you let through now becomes much harder to fix once motion is introduced. So this is one of those do as I say, not as I do sort of moments, because I definitely get into a flow sometimes and don't pay attention to all this every time, especially when it's my personal projects. All right, so step 7 is video generation. And for video generation, obviously motion is everything. It exposes more things than the images. And this is the stage where small inconsistencies and still images become very obvious, because once movement is introduced, it's also the stage where knowing your tools really starts to matter, if that makes any sense. See, during this project, there were a lot of new video generation models that were released, and some of them made a real impact on how this piece came together. Kling had a lot of new releases, and I used them a lot. And most of this, if not all of this, was done using Kling models. But that being said, there's not really, in my opinion, a single best model for video generation. I love VO3. I use VO 3.1 on a lot of projects, especially when there's dialogue. I know Kling 2.6 has dialogue also, but It just depends on the project on which models I'm using the most. So this is the phase where having your favorite model is useful, but relying on one can be risky because sometimes a model won't give you the outcome that you want and you'll keep prompting it and it's just not working. So even though sticking with a single model for consistency is generally a good idea, it's also important to have backup options. And knowing what video models are good at different things gives you flexibility. When one fails, you can pivot instead of stalling on the entire project. So this step isn't really about chasing the newest releases. It's about understanding what tools are out there enough to choose from the right one when you need it. All right, so step 8 is editing. And for this part, I do a lot of the editing to music like you would if you were making a music video. And I do this a bit more than I should a lot of times when I'm trying to make a project and maybe add a couple extra steps to it, but it works for me. It just takes me around the bend a little bit. So being that the musical timeline is also my storyboard, I usually start with images first as I'm building out the storyboard on the musical timeline. And those images, they just kind of act as the placeholders. And then from there, I start replacing the images with the video clips as I'm generating them. But this is where things start to get difficult. And that's the way it is with, I guess, a lot of editors in general, is now you have to decide what stays and what goes and what actually makes sense to support the story. And this is a multi-pass process for me. I can be a lot better at it, but I go through and then I trim some, go through, trim some more, and it's a whole thing. So I don't know how other people's process goes with this whole editing part, but if you have a certain system that works for you, let me know in the comments. Now, during this process, there is a tool that I've been using a lot, and it's Gemini, right? Because Gemini, they can analyze videos. So what I'll do is I'll export a rough cut and I'll drop it into Gemini and explain what I'm trying to achieve, or it already knows that because I've already had the whole chat filled with all the stuff that we've been going over for the project. And then I just ask it to analyze it. And for whatever reason, Gemini is really good when it comes to film stuff, scripts, all that kind of stuff, maybe because of all the YouTube data that they've been using, but I'm not sure. But they do a really good job. And since I don't have people on speed dial that can review my concepts or my different projects, this acts as a second set of eyes. So it doesn't replace taste or intuition, but it can actually serve for some blind spots, things that I miss because I've watched the same sequence so many times. It helps give that perspective and also a technical side of things that you may not have thought about. So let me give you a couple of examples what I did when I gave it a version of this not so long ago. In one section it says the AI factor. The basketball action shots are impressive, but be careful with the faces in the arena scenes. A few of the LSU shots have slightly inconsistent facial features. So the suggested fix is in the final edit, use faster cuts for the arena action so the eye doesn't linger on the AI faces too long. And then it talks about the shattering backboard. So at that point, I could go with what they said or go back through and regenerate some of these. Another suggestion was for technical recommendations for the final polish. Film grain match. So the Act 1 scenes have a beautiful heavy grain. The arena scenes look a bit cleaner and digital. So here's a tip. Add a 16mm film grain overlay to the arena clips in your video editor. And this can glue the two visual styles together. So as a side note, I just wanted to let you know that I do use that and it can be helpful, and you can use as much or none of it that it suggests as you want, but sometimes it can bring up things that can be very helpful for you. All right, and step 9 of this whole process is the narration. And this is the point where you decide how the story is actually spoken. You can do this earlier or later in this process, but this step 9 in my process. So depending on the project, this can go a few different ways. Sometimes narration makes the most sense, like I did with this video, and other times it's better to use lip sync dialogue or AI generated performance directly into the scenes. And I've gone deep into the realistic and consistent AI dialogue in another video. So if there's something you want to explore, go ahead and check it out. And I won't rehash all of it here. But for this project, I ended up going with the narration element. And my process looked like this. First, I used 11 Labs to do voice design. I gave it a very detailed prompt describing exactly what I wanted the voice to feel like and sound like, tone, pace, energy, all that kind of stuff. And that got me most of the way there. I was actually surprised at the voice that it gave me. So then I did a second pass because it was still a little tinny, and I dropped the narration into Descript, which I use for a lot of different things. And I applied their studio sound, and that cleaned things up even more. That added more body and it made the voice feel more grounded. So once I had all that done, I dropped it back into my timeline. And then step 10 is the sound design pass. And I am on this phase right now. And honestly, it's not my favorite part of the process. Wrapping up projects is almost always harder than starting them. And sound design is usually where the resistance kind of shows up for me. In the past, and still today, I use tools like 11 Labs for sound effects generation. Prompt to sound effects tools, they actually work really well, and I've been liking it a lot lately. But you still have to take those sound effects and sync them up with your videos, and especially when you have like a basketball bouncing and things like that, it can be pretty tedious. So because of that whole factor, I've been actively experimenting with some newer tools that can generate sound design directly from your video. These might not be newer, but they're newer to me at least. So there's a couple of them that I've landed on. Audio does one, and what's the other one called? Ace Studio is one of them that I'm on, and I'll probably look up a few more. But I landed on some of those, and here I'll show you one of the results. I'll give you the video without sound first and the video with sound that they added in, and I'm pretty impressed, so I'll probably dive into this process a bit further later on. So anyways, this is an area that I'm still exploring, and I may do a dedicated video on this, probably not, but we'll see. But I will explore those a bit more and see what I can find out. And then step 11 in this process is the final polish. So this is where you make sure the piece feels like one cohesive experience instead of a collection of individual clips and moments. And that usually means matching color across scenes, adding or balancing film grain so styles don't clash, and tightening edits and different things like that. And then once this step is complete, I step back, I evaluate it. If it's for me, then I usually at this point, I let it go because like I said, for myself, progress over perfection is best because there's so much more I need to do and want to learn that if I stay in the same thing for too long, then it's just wasting my time. So I also love it in the comments when everybody's like, this is off and that's off and this is wrong and that didn't work out. Yeah, well, that's a part of the process and I'm okay with it. But if this is for a client, this is where you send it off to them and they let you know how you feel about this. And my suggestion for that, if you're doing something like this for a client, is to send things over throughout. Don't go get 3 weeks into a project and then send them a version and they're like, that's completely off and then you've wasted 3 weeks. I would keep them in the loop unless they say, this is your project, you go for it. My suggestion is to keep them in the loop as you're going so that you're not wasting time and credits, which is essentially money. So to wrap things up, see, this is a process that works for me for now. And this is my process sort of distilled. So when I'm actually in the middle of a project, it's much messier than this. There's a lot more chaos, more backtracking, more experimentation than any clean framework or workflow can completely capture. But the structure is what I try to come back to when things start drifting or breaking. So the tools are going to change, the models are going to improve overnight, and some of the steps in this workflow might become faster or even unnecessary in the next few months. This whole workflow might become unnecessary in the next few months as technology shifts. But having a framework like this gives you something to fall back on, especially if you're just getting started or trying to understand where things went wrong on your project. So you can take what works here, ignore what doesn't, that's up to you, adapt it to your own process. And I'll do my best to turn this into a guide so you don't have to rewatch the video or take notes or whatever you may be doing. But if I do, it'll be linked in the description. So, all right, I think that's it for today. Now I got to get back in and do these final touches. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and play whatever version it ends up being at the time that this is done editing. So here you go. Take a look and we'll see how this thing turns out.
I never told you my feet hurt, Ma. I knew we didn't have the money. So I taped them up. I turned the pain into power. I stopped trying to fit into a world that was too small for me, and I started building a new one.
I grew up feeling like the world was too tight. Shoulders hitting doors when I walk by life. They kept telling me to slow down, hold that fight, but the fire in my chest kept sparking at night. Big frame, bigger dreams, I could not shrink. Tried to hold me back, but I broke that link. Pressure made gold every time I blink. Took hits, stood tall, never touched the brink. Had to learn to breathe in the smallest space. Till I built my own road and I changed my place. These are giant steps I take. Every move I make, I was made to rise no matter what it takes. I keep climbing through the way. I keep climbing through the way. The giant steps I take, every move I make, I was made to rise no matter what it takes. I keep climbing through the way. I keep climbing through the way. Hands to the pavement, eyes to the wind, chasing down a life I knew I should live in. Doubt in the shadow saying I will not win, but the voice in my soul said begin again. Heavy footsteps making rhythm from pain, heart hitting hard like a moving train. Turned every fear into something I claimed. Did not grow this tall just to live the same. When the world gets small, I rise past the wall, standing 10 feet tall, through every fall.
I didn't do it for the trophy. I did it for this.
So that was my experience this week and my breakdown. If you found any value in this video, make sure to like and subscribe, but also leave a comment. Even when I'm a little backed up on replies, I read through all of them. The comments are how I figure out what's missing, what's confusing, and what you actually want to learn next. And a lot of my future videos and guides are shaped directly by those questions. And if something didn't make sense or you want a deeper breakdown, that's where it starts. For a lot of these videos, I also put together extra materials like guides, prompts, workflow notes, and deeper breakdowns that didn't always fit inside of this single video. And you can find all of that along with the newsletter and links to my other channels in the link in the description. I'm also thinking about building out some sort of course based on this workflow. So if you're interested, just comment course and I can see if it's something that you all would be into. Well, thank you for watching and I really appreciate you being here and I'll see you in the next one.